On a dusty courthouse step, with the town watching, a young girl's life is about to be auctioned away like she ain't worth more than a mule. Her mother begs for mercy, but the lawman just rattles his keys and the banker smirks, ready to claim them both. Then thundering boots, a shadow over the crowd. A towering rancher steps forward, his voice shaking the air. "She's having my sons," gasps echo. The church bell tolls. In one shocking moment, the girl goes from worthless in their eyes to promised for a future no one expected. But behind closed doors, secrets burn hotter than prairie fire. A missing deed, a preacher's warning, and a truth buried in ashes that could turn the whole town against them. Now the question hangs like smoke in the air. Did the rancher just save their lives or put them in more danger than ever before? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments. Your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The scorching afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Copper Junction's courthouse steps. Dust devils whirled across the packed earth of the square as townsfolk gathered there. Whispers carrying on the hot breeze. The crowd pressed close, seeking better views of the spectacle about to unfold. 17-year-old Rebecca Alden stood trembling beside her mother. Her fingers intertwined tightly with Esther's. She kept her eyes fixed on her worn boots, unable to meet the hostile stares of the townspeople. Her cheeks burned as another coarse joke about her size echoed from somewhere in the crowd, followed by cruel laughter. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the mounting noise. Esther squeezed her daughter's hand harder. Her own face set in lines of quiet desperation. "Keep your chin up, child," she murmured, though her voice shook. "The Lord hasn't forsaken us yet." At the top of the courthouse steps, Silas Crandall cut an imposing figure in his black suit and string tie, every silver hair perfectly combed. The banker's thin lips curved in what might have passed for a smile, if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. Beside him, Sheriff Amos Kell shifted his weight from boot to boot, his badge gleaming dully in the harsh sunlight. "Now then," Crandall announced, his voice carrying across the square, "we're gathered here to settle the matter of outstanding debts left by the late James Alden." He held up a sheaf of papers. "These documents clearly show—" "Please, Esther," called out, taking a step forward. "Mr. Crandall, there must be some mistake. James never mentioned any such debt to me. If you'd just allow me time to examine the books, Mrs. Alden." Crandall cut her off, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "We've been through this. The debt is quite legitimate, I assure you. And as you've admitted you cannot pay, we must proceed with the only alternative." He gestured toward Rebecca. "A labor contract for the girl will satisfy the obligation." Fresh murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rebecca pressed closer to her mother, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd heard stories of such labor contracts before, young people bound into what amounted to servitude, working off impossible debts under harsh conditions. Sheriff Kell stepped forward, unfolding a document with obvious relish. "By the authority vested in me, no." The single word rang out across the square, deep and firm as thunder. The crowd parted like water as Boaz McCord strode forward. He moved with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, his broad shoulders and tall frame drawing all eyes. His Cherokee heritage was evident in his high cheekbones and jet-black hair. Though his skin was tanned from long days working his ranch, Rebecca felt her breath catch. She'd seen the rancher in town before, always keeping to himself, speaking little. Now his presence seemed to fill the entire square. "This auction won't be happening today," Boaz declared, his dark eyes fixed on Crandall. The banker's careful smile tightened. "Mr. McCord, this is a legal proceeding. You have no standing here. I do now." Boaz took another step forward, his. Boots raising small clouds of dust. That girl won't be sold into any contract. She's having my sons. The words fell like stones into still water. For a moment, complete silence gripped the square. Then the whispers erupted like a swarm of angry bees. Esther's face went white with shock and outrage. "How dare you?" she gasped. Rebecca swayed on her feet, spots dancing before her eyes. Having Boaz McCord's sons, her. The very idea seemed impossible, like something from a fever dream. McCord's lost his mind, someone muttered. Half-breeds getting above himself. Another voice growled. Boaz ignored them all, reaching into his vest to withdraw a folded packet of papers. "My ranch deed," he announced, holding it out to Crandall. Clear title to 800 acres, good water rights, and a growing herd. More than enough to cover any legitimate debt. Sheriff Kell's hand drifted toward his gun belt. "Now see here, McCord. Take your hand off that pistol, Sheriff," Boaz said quietly. "Unless you're eager to explain to a judge why you drew on an unarmed man making a legal offer." The lawman's face reddened, but his hand dropped away from his weapon. Crandall studied Boaz through narrowed eyes. "You'd stake your entire ranch on this arrangement." "I would." Boaz's voice carried absolute certainty. "Those papers are my collateral. The debt transfers to me, and the girl stays free." More whispers raced through the crowd. Everyone knew. The McCord Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the territory. The offer was too substantial to dismiss out of hand. Esther stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "Mr. McCord, I don't know what game you're playing, but my daughter is not some piece of property to be bartered." "No, she's not." Boaz agreed, his eyes softening as they met hers. "Which is why I'm making sure she stays that way." Rebecca finally found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "But why?" Boaz turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw something in his expression, compassion, perhaps, or understanding that made her heart skip a beat. "Because it's right," he said simply. Crandall's fingers drummed against the papers in his hands. The banker was clearly calculating, weighing the value of the McCord Ranch against his original plans. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Very well. The papers will need to be properly filed, of course, and there will be conditions. We can discuss those inside," Boaz replied evenly. After the crowd disperses, the sheriff looked disappointed at the loss of his spectacle, but began shooing people away from the courthouse steps. The townspeople slowly scattered, though their gossip hung in the air like the dust their boots had kicked up. Rebecca stood rooted to the spot, her mind whirling. In the space of a few minutes, her entire world had shifted. She wasn't being sold into servitude, but instead had been claimed as the future mother of Boaz McCord's children. The very thought made her dizzy. Esther's voice cut through her confusion. "Mr. McCord, I demand an explanation. You can't simply announce intentions." "Regarding my daughter without Mrs. Alden," Boaz interrupted gently, "I believe we all need to talk, but not here in the street." He glanced meaningfully at the remaining onlookers who lingered at the edges of the square. Crandall cleared his throat. "My office. Then we'll draw up the necessary documents." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As they moved toward the bank building, Rebecca felt the weight of stairs following them. She sneaked a glance at Boaz McCord's broad back, wondering what possessed this solitary rancher to step forward and turn his whole life upside down for her sake. More than that, she wondered what this shocking announcement would mean for all their futures. The thought sent a shiver down her spine despite the afternoon heat, and she hurried to keep up with the others, dust puffing beneath her feet with each step. The sun continued to beat down on Cobra Junction, but the real heat was just beginning. To Ricin whispered rumors in Esther's protective anger, in Crandall's calculating gaze, and in the mysteries lurking behind Boaz McCord's unexpected declaration. Dusk painted the sky in deep purples and oranges as Esther guided her trembling daughter away from the courthouse. The cooling air brought little relief from the day's tension. Townsfolk lined the dusty street, their whispers sharp as rattlers. "Shame on you, Boaz McCord," someone called out. Taking advantage of their situation, guess the half-breeds got plans for that girl, another voice sneered. Rebecca's shoulders hunched at each cruel comment. Esther wrapped an arm around her daughter's thick waist, drawing her close. "Keep your head up, dear heart," she whispered. "Don't let them see you cry." They made their way toward the livery stable where Boaz waited with his wagon. The big rancher stood beside his team of horses, his face unreadable in the failing light. The wagon bed was already loaded with the few possessions they'd managed to save from their foreclosed home: 2 trunks of clothing, some quilts, and a wooden box containing James's Bible and letters. Esther planted herself between Boaz and her daughter. "Mr. McCord, I demand to know what game you're playing. That spectacle at the courthouse? No game. Mrs. Alden." Boaz's deep voice was soft but firm. "I saw a wrong being done and couldn't stand idle. You announced intentions toward my daughter without so much as I saw this before," he interrupted, his dark eyes distant. "Back on Cherokee land, men with papers and laws, treating people like cattle to be sold." He turned to face them fully. A young girl not much older than Rebecca, bound into service to pay her father's supposed debts. No one stood up then. I swore I'd never let it happen again if I could help it. The simple truth in his words gave Esther pause. She studied his face in the deepening twilight, the high Cherokee cheekbones, the quiet dignity in his bearing. After a long moment, she gave a sharp nod. "Very well. But understand this. If you make one improper move toward my daughter," Rebecca whispered, mortified. "You have my word," Boaz said. "As the good book says, defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. That's all I aim to do." He gestured to the wagon. "My ranch is yours for as long as you need shelter. No strings attached." The alternative was sleeping rough or throwing themselves on the dubious mercy of townspeople, who just stood by watching Rebecca nearly sold into servitude. Esther squared her shoulders. "We accept, for now." Boaz helped them up onto the wagon. Seat, his movements careful and respectful. The horses' hooves clip-clopped against packed earth as they left Cabra Junction behind. A full moon rose over the desert, turning the landscape silver. The trail wound through mesquite and sage, climbing gradually toward the foothills. After several miles, they crested a rise, and Boaz's ranch spread out before them, a sprawling adobe house with a broad porch, corrals, and outbuildings scattered across the valley floor. "It's so big," Rebecca murmured, the first words she'd spoken since leaving town. "Too big for one man," Boaz admitted. "My father built it, dreaming of filling it with family." The wagon rolled to a stop before the house. Inside, Boaz lit several oil lamps, their warm glow revealing simple but solid furnishings: a pine table, straight-back chairs, a few colorful Cherokee blankets on the walls. A fire already smoldered in the hearth, and he added wood until it crackled cheerfully. "Guest rooms down that hall," he said, pointing. "Clean sheets on the bed. Kitchen stocked if you're hungry." Rebecca swayed on her feet, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. The day's events had drained her completely. "Go on, dear," Esther said softly. "Get some rest." After Rebecca disappeared down the hall, Esther remained in the main room, back straight, watching Boaz warily. He moved about his evening routine as if they weren't there, filling a kettle, checking doors. Finally, he knelt beside his chair, hands clasped. His prayer, spoken quietly but clearly, filled the room. "Lord, you know the hearts of all men. Guide my steps in this matter. Help me protect these women as you would have me do. Give them peace in their trouble and show me how to be a proper guardian. In Jesus' name, amen. Esther stood in the doorway, startled by the simple sincerity in his words. Despite herself, she felt some of her suspicion begin to crack. This giant of a man, feared by many for his heritage, prayed with the straightforward faith of a child. After Boaz retired to his room, Esther remained by the fire. Her whispered prayer rose like smoke. Father in heaven, I don't know if we can trust this man, but you let us hear. Help me see your path clearly. Watch over my girl. Give me wisdom. Amen. The fire popped and settled. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Esther wrapped her shawl tighter, uncertain of all that lay ahead, but knowing they had found refuge for at least this one night. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, painting golden squares across Boaz's worn plank floor. Esther stood at the iron cookstove, stirring a pot of cornmeal mush. Her movements were hesitant. This wasn't her kitchen. These weren't her pots. But hunger had driven her to search the pantry, where she'd found basic provisions: flour, dried, beans, coffee, and a precious tin of sugar. The aroma of coffee drew Boaz from his room. He paused in the doorway, filling it with his broad frame. Much obliged for cooking, Mrs. Alden. Usually just have cold biscuits myself. Least I could do, Esther replied stiffly, spooning the mush into 3 bowls. Though I don't mean to. Presume with your supplies. My home is your home now. He poured coffee into tin cups, his movements deliberate and careful. Everything here is for sharing. Rebecca appeared, her hair hastily braided, eyes still heavy with sleep. She hesitated. Before taking a seat at the table, the chair creaking beneath her weight. A flush crept up her neck as she stared down at her bowl. Best eat hearty, Boaz said, passing her the sugar. Got a full day ahead. Plenty of ranch work needs doing. Esther's spine stiffened. We're not servants, Mr. McCord. No, ma'am. Guests, but idle hands make for troubled minds. He sipped his coffee. Work brings purpose. Helps a body sleep better, too. After breakfast, they followed Boaz to the barn. Morning light slanted through gaps in the weathered boards, catching dust motes in golden beams. The sweet smell of hay mingled with leather and horse liniment. First job's feeding the young calves, Boaz explained, hefting a bag of feed. Lost. They're mamas to mountain lions last month. Need bottle feeding twice daily. He demonstrated how to mix the milk replacement, then handed a bottle to Rebecca. She approached the nearest calf with trepidation. The gangly creature bumped against her legs, nearly knocking her over in its eagerness to feed. Oh! Rebecca gasped, stumbling backward. You're doing fine, Boaz assured her. They're just hungry little ones. Hold the bottle higher. That's it. A small smile touched Rebecca's lips as the calf suckled greedily. Esther watched from the barn door, noting how Boaz kept a respectful distance while offering quiet guidance. Next came fence mending. The hot sun beat down as they walked the property line, carrying tools and fresh rails. Rebecca struggled with the heavy posts, her face red with exertion and embarrassment. I'm not strong enough, she muttered, dropping a rail. I'm too clumsy. Strength comes with practice, Boaz said, showing her how to leverage her weight properly. See how the post sets better now? You've got good instincts. By mid-morning, they reached the windmill. Its metal blades creaked overhead, pumping precious water into a storage tank. Boaz demonstrated how to check the mechanical parts and oil the bearings. Water's life out here, he explained, filling buckets for the house. Got to tend it careful, like everything else that matters. Rebecca listened intently, her usual shyness forgotten as she asked questions about the windmill's operation. Esther noticed how her daughter stood straighter when Boaz praised her quick understanding. The day passed in a blur of new tasks. Supper time. They were all dust-covered and weary. Esther prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, served on Boaz's plain earthenware dishes. As they ate, Rebecca looked up from her plate. "Mr. McCord." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Would you tell us about your mother? Your Cherokee mother?" Esther tensed, but Boaz's expression remained gentle. "What would you like to know? Everything? How she lived? What she believed?" Boaz set down his fork, considering. "She was a strong woman, survived the Trail of Tears as a child. That's what they called the forced march west. Lost most of her family, but never lost her dignity." His deep voice held quiet. "Pride. She taught me that true strength isn't in muscle or might, but in enduring with grace. In helping others, endure too." "Did she teach you to pray?" Rebecca asked. "I heard you last night." "She did. Taught me Jesus' words in both English and Cherokee. Said truth speaks in all tongues, if we have ears to hear." Esther watched her daughter drink in every word. She hadn't seen Rebecca so engaged with anyone in months. After Rebecca went to bed, Esther found Boaz on the porch, watching stars pierce the darkening sky. She cleared her throat. "I want to thank you for today, for your kindness to Rebecca especially. She's had it hard lately." Boaz nodded, waiting. "But I must be clear," Esther continued. "Whatever you said at the courthouse, I cannot allow false pretenses. Rebecca is young, vulnerable. If you think this arrangement implies any claim on her, Mrs. Alden." Boaz turned to face her fully. "What I said yesterday, I meant every word. Not as possession, but as protection. Where I come from, claiming kin means taking responsibility, being guardian, defender, provider, if needed. Nothing more. And when the town gossips, when they assume the worst, let them talk. Truth stands longer than rumors." He gestured. "At the vast darkness beyond the porch, out here, what matters is how we treat each other, how we help each other survive." Esther studied his profile in the starlight, seeing again that quiet dignity that had first caught her attention. Perhaps, she thought, there were different kinds of truth and different kinds of protection than she'd known before. Night settled over the ranch house like a blanket. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a whippoorwill called, its lonely song echoing across the desert night. 2 days passed like water through desert sand. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when hoofbeats echoed across Boaz's yard. 2 riders approached through the dust, their silhouettes all too familiar. Esther looked up from where she'd been helping Rebecca feed the orphaned calves. Her hands trembled on the milk bottle. "Rebecca, go inside, now." But Rebecca stood frozen, the calf butting against her skirts, as Silas Crandall and Sheriff Kell reined their horses at the gate. Boaz emerged from the barn, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the yard. "Well, ain't this domestic?" Kell drawled, adjusting his gun belt. "Regular little family you got here, McCord." Crandall dismounted, his polished boots raising puffs of dust. His gray suit looked out of place against the weathered fence posts. "Mrs. Alden, how convenient to find you here. State your business." Boaz said quietly, moving to stand between the men and his guests. "Official business." Kell patted the papers in his vest pocket. "Is that writ of execution still valid? Unless the widow can produce proper title to her late husband's ranch, the girl remains subject to public auction." Esther's face went pale. "The deed, we lost it in the fire 3 years ago. How unfortunate." Crandall's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No copy filed at the county office either. Most irregular." "You know full well that office burned too," Boaz said, "along with half the records in town." "Then I'm afraid Mrs. Alden has no legal claim." Crandall brushed dust from his sleeve. The property reverts to the bank. And without property, he let the words hang. Rebecca pressed closer to her mother, the forgotten milk bottle dropping to the dirt. The orphaned calf bawled plaintively. "My collateral stands," Boaz said. "I put up my own ranch papers against any claim." About that, Crandall's smile widened. "Sheriff, show him the other document." Kell produced another paper with a flourish. "Seems there's some question about your property lines, McCord. Survey team found some discrepancies. Might have to seize your spread too, pending investigation." "You manufactured those discrepancies," Boaz said, his voice level but hard as iron. "Prove it." Crandall mounted his horse. "You have 3 days to produce valid titles, both of you." After that, he touched the brim of his hat. "Well, I'm sure. The girl will fetch a fair price." Second time at auction usually goes smoother. Kell laughed, an ugly sound. Especially now she's had time to learn some useful skills. Boaz took one step forward. The sheriff's hand dropped to his gun, but Crandall raised a staying hand. Now, we're all civilized here. Ate to you all." They rode away, leaving only dust and the bitter taste of dread behind. Rebecca stood trembling, tears tracking down her round cheeks. The orphaned calf nudged her hand, seeking comfort. The day dragged by like a wounded thing. Esther went through the motions of routine, feeding chickens, hauling water, preparing supper, but her movements were mechanical, her eyes distant. As she stirred the bean pot that evening, her shoulders began to shake. "Mama," Rebecca paused. In the doorway, a fresh load of kindling in her arms. "I'm sorry," Esther whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I'm so sorry, my girl. This is all my fault. If I'd been more careful with the papers, if I'd found some way to pay the debts. Now look what I've brought down on all our heads. Don't cry, Mama." Rebecca set down the wood and wrapped her arms around her mother. "Please don't. I'll work harder. I'll show them I'm worth something." "You shouldn't have to prove your worth to anyone," Esther said fiercely, hugging her daughter. "Close. You're not property to be valued and sold." "No," came Boaz's deep voice from the door. "She's not. Neither of you are." He stood there, hat in hand, respect in every line of his body. The setting sun through the window set his Cherokee features in sharp relief, highlighting the strength and dignity in his face. "Supper's ready," Esther said, hastily wiping her eyes, "though I fear I let the beans scorch, being so distracted." "Beans'll do fine," Boaz said quietly. They gathered around the table. This makeshift family bound together by circumstance and threat. The silence as they ate was heavy with unspoken fears. Outside, a coyote called mournfully across the darkening range. The orphaned calves bawled for their evening feeding, their cries carrying clear and plaintive through the evening air. Rebecca pushed her beans around her plate. "Mr. McCord, will they really take your ranch too?" "Don't you fret about that now," he said gently. "But it's because of us. Because you tried to help." "No," his voice was firm. "It's because some men value paper more than people. Because they think might makes right." He looked at both of them across the table. "But they're wrong about that. Dead wrong." Esther met his eyes, seeing the same quiet strength that had first drawn her attention at the courthouse. Whatever came. Next, she realized, they would face it together. The lamp flickered low as night settled over the ranch house. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called a lonely sound that echoed across the desert. Carrying with it all their unnamed fears about the days ahead, dawn painted the desert in watercolor hues of pink and gold. The morning air held a crisp bite, carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. In the corral, Boaz stood beside a gentle sorrel mare, his patience as steady as the mountains on the horizon. "Now watch careful," he said, holding up the saddle blanket for Rebecca to see. "You want to lay it just so, starting at the withers and smoothing back. Keeps the horse comfortable and prevents sores. Rebecca nodded, her round face intent with concentration. The mare nickered softly as Boaz demonstrated the proper placement. From the porch, Esther paused in hanging laundry, anxiety and warmth warring in her chest as she watched them. "Your turn," Boaz said, handing Rebecca another blanket. She stepped forward, her movements hesitant but willing. The mare turned her. Head, dark eyes, gentle as Rebecca reached up. "Like this." Her voice quavered. "That's right. Don't be afraid, old Sally here's got more patience than a saint." Boaz's deep voice carried quiet encouragement. "Now the saddle. Remember to lift. With your legs, not your back." Rebecca struggled with the heavy leather, her face flushing with effort. But she didn't give up, and after a moment's awkward maneuvering, the saddle settled into place. "Well done." Boaz's praise brought a shy smile to Rebecca's face. "Cinch not too tight, not too loose. Horse has to breathe, but saddle can't slip." As Rebecca worked at the straps, her initial tension melted away. When the mare accepted a sugar cube from her palm, a delighted laugh rang out across the corral, bright and unguarded, like spring water over stones. Esther's hands stilled on the wet sheet she was hanging. When was the last time she'd heard her daughter laugh like that? The sound tugged at her heart, even as worry gnawed at her mind. What would the town say about this arrangement? A widow and her daughter living under an unmarried man's roof, riding lessons like they belonged there. The morning passed in a blur of chores and lessons. Rebecca's confidence grew with each small success, leading the mare, mounting smoothly, sitting straight in the saddle. By noon, she was walking the horse in careful circles while Boaz called out gentle corrections. Sunday dawned clear and cool. The little church on the edge of town filled slowly with townsfolk in their best clothes. Esther felt their stares as she led Rebecca to a pew, Boaz following a respectful distance behind Op. Pastor Jonas Pell stood straight and tall behind his pulpit, his weathered face grave as he opened his Bible. His sermon rang with quiet force through the wooden walls. "Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this," he read, "to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world." His eyes swept the congregation. The Lord's words are clear on how we treat those in need. Some men may twist the law for profit, but God's justice cannot be bought or sold. Whispers rustled like dry leaves. In the back pew, Silas Crandall's face darkened. Several townsfolk nodded slowly, while others exchanged knowing looks and poorly. Hidden smirks. "Remember," Pastor Pell continued, "it was Christ himself who drove the money changers from the temple. Those who prey upon the vulnerable may prosper for a season, but their day of reckoning comes." After the final hymn, people gathered in knots outside, sharing news and judgment in equal measure. Rebecca stood awkwardly by the steps, trying to make herself smaller as a group of girls her age passed by. "Did you see her on that horse yesterday?" one whispered loudly. Surprised it didn't collapse. Cruel giggles followed. Rebecca's shoulders hunched, then slowly straightened. She lifted her chin, remembering the feel of the reins in her hands, the mare's steady movement beneath her. The girls' laughter faded as she met their eyes with quiet dignity. Ready to head home, Boaz appeared at Esther's elbow, his presence solid and reassuring. "Yes, I believe we are," Esther gathered, her skirts steadfastly ignoring the whispers. As they walked to their horses, Boaz spoke softly. "You're not alone in this fight, Mrs. Alden, either of you." "I know," Esther's voice caught, "though sometimes I wonder if we've brought trouble to your door instead of the other way around." "Trouble was already here," he replied, "just wearing a banker's suit instead of showing its true face." From the churchyard, Crandall watched them mount up, his cold eyes calculating. But as they rode away, Rebecca sat straighter in her saddle than she had in years. The morning sun caught her face, and for a moment, she looked almost peaceful. The trail home wound through stands of mesquite and prickly pear. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry carrying clear and free across the desert. Despite the weight of Crandall's threats, despite the town's judgment, a small spark of courage had taken root in all their hearts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the charred remains of the Alden homestead. Esther's throat tightened as she stepped over blackened timbers, the acrid smell of old smoke still clinging to the ruins. Memories flickered like ghosts, her husband Thomas building the front porch, little Rebecca taking her first steps by. The hearth, countless meals shared around their sturdy oak table. All gone now. Mama, look here. Rebecca's voice wavered from what remained of the kitchen corner. She knelt in the ash, her skirts gathering soot. The floor beams collapsed just so there might be something underneath. Boaz moved carefully through the debris, his imposing frame ducking beneath a partially standing beam. Best let me shift these heavy pieces, Miss Rebecca. Don't want anything giving way, sudden-like. With methodical strength, he lifted charred boards while Esther and Rebecca searched beneath. The work was grimy, coating their hands in black dust. Esther's eyes stung, though whether from ash or tears, she couldn't say. There's something metal. Rebecca reached into a hollow space beneath the burned floorboards. Her fingers brushed. Something solid. Papa's strongbox, the one he always kept under the loose board. Boaz helped clear more debris. The tin box emerged, its surface scorched but intact. Esther's hands trembled as she took it. The key had melted away, but Boaz worked the warped lid open with careful pressure. Inside, protected from the flames, lay a stack of papers. Esther unfolded the topmost document with shaking fingers. The deed, she whispered. Thomas's deed to our land. All this time, but there was more. Beneath the deed lay letters, their edges singed but legible. Rebecca peered over her mother's shoulder as Esther began to read. Her gasp echoed in the ruins. These are from the Cherokee families who sold grazing rights to Papa, Rebecca said. But look the amounts they mention. They're nothing like what Mr. Crandall claimed they were paid. Boaz's expression darkened as he examined one letter. Remember these people, good folk who worked honest deals. But Crandall, he shook his head. He falsified the records, charged them 3 times over what they'd agreed to. When they couldn't pay, he seized their lands. Esther sank onto a fallen beam. Papers clutched to her chest. Tears streaked clean lines down her dust-covered cheeks. All this time, Thomas knew. He was gathering evidence against Crandall's schemes. Could be why the fire started when it did, Boaz said quietly. Mighty convenient timing. The sun dipped lower, painting the ruins in amber light. Rebecca gathered every paper with reverent care, studying her father's familiar handwriting. His signature flowed across deeds and letters, a good man's mark, bearing witness to truth. Back at Boaz's ranch house, Rebecca spread the documents across the kitchen table. Lamplight pooled golden on the weathered wood as she bent over each page, committing every word to memory. Her lips moved silently, tracing her father's careful script in the sitting room. Esther and Boaz shared coffee, their voices low. The familiar aroma of coffee grounds and wood smoke wrapped around them like a quilt. We'll need to move careful, Boaz warned. Crandall's got friends in high places. Won't take kindly to being exposed. Esther nodded, warming her hands on her cup. But we have proof now. Real proof of what Thomas suspected. She glanced toward the kitchen where Rebecca still studied the papers. My girl's got her father's determination. Won't rest till she knows every word by heart. Takes after her mama too, Boaz said softly. Their eyes met across the rim of their cups, something unspoken passing between them. More than just allies against Crandall, now something warmer, like family coming together around a hearth. Through the window, the first pale light of dawn began to streak the sky. Hope rose with it, as tangible as the proof now spread across the kitchen table. Rebecca's voice drifted from the kitchen, reading her father's words aloud like a prayer of thanksgiving. The long night of uncertainty was ending. Morning brought not just light, but truth at last. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright over Cobro Junction. The church bell's deep tone rang across the dusty streets, calling the faithful to worship. Inside the whitewashed wooden building, sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Esther smoothed her best black dress with trembling hands as she sat in the back pew. The deed and letters felt heavy in her reticule, precious proof of both salvation and corruption. Beside her, Rebecca fidgeted with the ribbon on her collar, her face pale but determined. Boaz's tall frame filled the space on their other side, his presence steady as a mountain. Pastor Jonas Pell stood at the pulpit, his weathered face serious as he delivered his sermon on Proverbs. His words about justice and truth seemed to echo with special meaning this morning. As he finished speaking, Esther caught his eye and gave a slight nod. Before we conclude our service, Pastor Pell announced, his voice carrying to every corner, Mrs. Alden has asked to address the congregation on a matter of great importance. A rustle of whispers swept through the assembled townsfolk. Esther rose, clutching her reticule tight. Her legs felt wooden as she walked to the front, but with each step, she drew strength from the memory of Thomas's love, from Rebecca's courage, from Boaz's unwavering support. "Good people of Cobra Junction," she began, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "You all knew my husband Thomas. He was an honest man who kept careful records." She withdrew the deed, holding it high. The paper caught the sunlight, making the official seal gleam. "This is the deed to our ranch, the one that supposedly burned. The Lord saw fit to preserve it." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Sheriff Kell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several of the town council members leaned forward, squinting at the document. Furthermore, Esther continued, "My daughter Rebecca has something to share from her father's letters." She turned, extending her hand. "Come, dear." Rebecca rose slowly. Her cheeks flamed red as every eye turned to her, but she walked steadily to join her mother. Boaz followed, standing like a guardian at the edge of the platform. His presence seemed to give the girl courage. Rebecca's hands shook as she unfolded one of the letters. She took a deep breath, then began reading in a voice that started soft but grew stronger with each word. "My dearest daughter, I write this to record a great wrong I've witnessed. Mr. Crandall has been destroying deeds belonging to Cherokee families, then claiming their grazing lands as bank property. He forced White Feather's people from Ghost Creek Valley last spring, and now aims to take Eagles View Ridge. I cannot stay silent." A commotion erupted near the back of the church. Silas Crandall had half risen from his pew, his face mottled with rage, but before he could speak, other voices rose. "I remember White Feather's people," called old Mrs. Henderson. "They always paid fair for their grazing rights. Then, one day, gone. My Joseph traded with them regular," added Widow Cooper. "Never did understand why they left so sudden-like." Rebecca's voice gained strength, riding over the noise. "These good people have grazed these lands for generations. Their claims are legitimate, their payments documented. I have recorded every transaction in my ledger. Though Crandall's books tell a different tale, you can't trust a half-breed's word." Crandall snarled, but his outburst brought instant silence. Pastor Pell's voice cut like steel. "We trust the word of God in this house, Mr. Crandall, and his word speaks clearly about bearing false witness and moving boundary stones. more voices joined in support. The Henderson boys, who'd once mocked Rebecca, now nodded vigorously at her words. Their mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Sheriff Kell looked troubled, his weathered face drawn with dawning understanding. Esther felt tears threatening as she watched her daughter stand straight and tall, reading her father's words without shame. The girl who had once hidden from the world now commanded its attention. When she finished, the silence held for a long moment before someone began to clap. The applause spread like prairie fire. Several of the town council members approached to examine the deed. Others gathered around Rebecca, asking to see the letters. Mrs. Henderson hugged the girl, whispering something that made her smile. Through it all, Boaz remained at their side, his quiet presence a shield against any who might wish them ill. The morning sun climbed higher, pouring through the windows like liquid gold. Esther felt its warmth on her face, along with the warm hands of neighbors patting her shoulder, offering support. She caught Boaz's eye and saw in his gentle smile the same joy she felt, not just at their victory, but at watching Rebecca bloom in the light of acceptance and truth. Even those who had been skeptical of the Aldens now pressed forward to share stories of Thomas's honesty, of trades with the Cherokee families, of suspicions about Crandall's dealings that they'd been afraid to voice. The church hummed with the sound of justice awakening, of a community choosing truth over convenience, of hearts turning toward what was right in that sacred space. Surrounded by the witnesses of heaven and earth, Esther felt her dignity not just restored, but multiplied. She stood taller, supported by the strength of her daughter's courage and the steadfast faith of the man who had risked everything to protect them both. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the ink-black sky over Boaz McCord's ranch. Cricket song filled the warm night air as the household settled into peaceful sleep, exhausted but content after their victory at church. Lamplight had long since faded from the windows, leaving only starlight to paint shadows across the yard. Inside, Esther dozed in the guest room, her prayers of thanksgiving still fresh on her lips. Down the hall, Rebecca slumbered deeply, her father's letters tucked safely beneath her pillow. Boaz's steady breathing came from his room at the far end of the house, his big frame stretched across the bed, at peace with the day's events. But peace was not meant to last. Hoofbeats approached Esther's old homestead, where the scorched ruins still stood as a testament to loss. Dark figures dismounted, their boots crunching on ash and charred timber. Moonlight glinted off a silver watch chain as Silas Crandall emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with rage. "Find that strongbox," he hissed to his men. "Burn everything. Leave nothing but ashes." The men worked quickly, spreading oil and setting torches to what remained of the cabin. Flames licked up the old wood like hungry demons, casting orange light across their grim faces. The fire spread fast, feeding on dry timber and desert wind. Miles away, Tom Henderson was riding home late when he spotted the glow against the night sky. His horse's hooves thundered across the hard-packed earth as he raced toward Boaz's ranch, panic spurring him on. The pounding on Boaz's door shattered the night's quiet. "Fire!" Tom's voice cracked with urgency. "The Alden place sits burning." Boaz burst from his room, boots already on his feet. Esther appeared in her doorway, face white with fear. "The strongbox," she gasped. "The letters." They rushed to saddle horses, Boaz's hand swift and sure even in darkness. Rebecca stumbled out, still pulling on her boots, eyes wide with terror. The girl had never ridden at night, but there was no time for fear. Boaz lifted her onto her horse as easily as placing a child in a chair. "Stay close," he commanded, his deep voice steady despite the urgency. "Follow my lead." They thundered through the darkness, the horses' hooves raising dust that mixed with the smoke now visible against the stars. The closer they got, the brighter The sky glowed until the inferno came into view, wall of flame consuming what little remained of the Alden homestead. No. Esther's cry cut through the roar of the fire. The proof all of it, Rebecca spurred her horse forward, breaking from the group. The strongbox might still be there, she shouted, riding straight for the burning building. Rebecca, stop. Boaz's voice boomed across the night. But it was too late. The girl had already dismounted and darted toward the cabin's remains. She disappeared into the smoke just as a massive beam, weakened by flame, gave way with a horrible crack. It crashed down across the doorway, trapping her inside. Mama, Rebecca's terrified scream pierced the night. I can't breathe. Esther screamed her daughter's name, trying to run forward, but Tom Henderson held her back from the inferno. Boaz was already moving, guiding his horse straight toward the flames. The big stallion fought him, eyes rolling white with fear, but Boaz's firm hands steadied it. Trust me, brother, he murmured in Cherokee to the frightened animal. Then he spurred forward into hell itself. Smoke clawed at his lungs as he navigated through the burning timbers. The heat was incredible, singeing his hair and clothes. Through the haze, he spotted Rebecca crouched against a wall, coughing violently. Her dress already smoking. Without hesitation, Boaz leaned down from the saddle, his powerful arms scooping her up like a child. She clutched at his shirt, choking on the thick smoke. The horse wheeled around, fighting panic as burning debris rained down around them. Hold tight, Boaz commanded, kicking the stallion forward just as the roof began to give way. They burst from the inferno in a shower of sparks, the horse's hooves barely touching ground as it fled the collapsing building. Behind them, the roof caved in with a thunderous crash, sending a geyser of embers skyward. Esther ran to meet them as Boaz pulled his horse to a stop. She helped pull Rebecca down, clutching her daughter close as they sank to their knees in the dirt. The girl's face was streaked with soot, her hair singed at the ends, but she was alive. My baby, Esther sobbed, running trembling hands over Rebecca's face and arms, checking for injuries. What were you thinking? The strongbox, Rebecca choked out between coughs. Obese. I had to save Papa's letters. Boaz dismounted, his own face blackened with smoke, and knelt beside them. You're worth more than any papers, he said firmly, his voice rough from the smoke. Your father would say the same. They watched helplessly as the fire consumed everything, turning proof to ash. Flakes of burned paper floated on the hot wind like black snow, carrying away their hopes of justice. Esther's wails of despair mixed with the crack and roar of the flames. A sound of loss as old as time. Tom Henderson had already gone for help. But they knew it was too late. By the time neighbors arrived with water barrels, there would be nothing left to save. Nothing but ashes and the bitter taste of defeat. Rebecca buried her face in her mother's shoulder, shoulders shaking with sobs. Her singed hair carried the acrid smell of smoke, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing far more than evidence. Esther rocked her daughter, her own tears falling freely as she stared at the destruction of their last connection to Thomas. Boaz stood guard over them, his tall frame silhouetted against the flames. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. Let's get you both home. You need rest and clean air. But home felt like a distant dream. As they watched hope burn away in the desert night, leaving only despair in its wake. The victory they'd felt in church seemed hollow now, destroyed as thoroughly as the cabin that had once held their proof. Dawn crept across the desert, pale fingers of light illuminating the destruction at the Alden homestead. Wisps of smoke still rose from the blackened ruins like ghostly sentinels, carrying the acrid scent of burned hopes skyward. The rising sun cast long shadows through the skeletal remains of roof beams. Now, cold and defeated against the pink morning sky, Rebekah stood. Between her mother and Boaz, her nightgown still smudged with soot from the evening's terror. Her shoulders trembled as fresh tears traced clean lines down her ash-stained cheeks. The morning breeze tugged at her singed hair, carrying away the bitter smell of smoke that still clung to them all. "If I hadn't been so slow," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If I wasn't always getting in the way," a sob caught in her throat. "The strongbox might still be safe if I hadn't been so clumsy trying to reach it." Esther pulled her daughter close, pressing Rebekah's head to her shoulder. "No, my darling girl, none of this is your fault." Her voice was fierce with maternal protection, even as her own eyes glistened with tears. "This evil lies at other men's feet, not yours." Boaz stood like an oak beside them, his massive frame rigid with barely contained fury. His jaw clenched as he surveyed the destruction, hands balled into fists at his sides. The morning light caught the angles of his face, highlighting the Cherokee blood that ran proud in his features. "There will be justice," he said, his deep voice tight with controlled anger. "If not by law, then by truth. The Lord sees all things." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Sheriff Amos Kell rode up, his badge gleaming in the morning sun like a false promise. His mount pranced sideways, sensing its rider's malicious satisfaction. "Well now," Kell drawled, touching the brim of his hat with mock politeness. "Quite a bonfire you had here last night." His eyes glittered with cruel amusement. "Mr. Crandall wanted me to deliver some news, seeing as I'm an officer of the law and all." Boaz stepped forward, placing himself between the sheriff and the women. "Say your piece and ride on, Kell." The sheriff's smile widened. "Mr. Crandall has declared the Aldens illegal squatters, seeing as they can't produce no deed to this property." He paused, savoring their pain. "And that means you're collaterals, worth about as much as these ashes McCord. Null and void, just like their claim." Esther's knees buckled. She would have fallen if not for Rebekah's supporting arms. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." "The law's the law," Kell said, clearly enjoying himself. "You folks best start thinking about where you're going to go." He wheeled his horse around, kicking up dust that settled on the ruins of their hopes. "Good day to you all." They watched him ride away, his satisfaction hanging in the air like poison. Esther sank to her knees in the dirt, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Rebekah knelt beside her mother, trying to offer comfort even as tears streamed down her own face. Boaz stood guard over them, his shadow stretching long across the charred earth. His eyes held a storm of emotions, rage at the injustice, sorrow for their pain, and somewhere deeper, an unshakable determination. The day passed in a fog of grief and exhaustion. They returned to Boaz's ranch, moving through the necessary tasks of living like sleepwalkers. The horses still needed feeding, the chickens still required their grain. But every movement felt weighted with lead. Evening found them at the supper table, the usual comfortable silence now heavy with despair. Steam rose from bowls of stew that no one touched. The lamp's warm glow seemed to mock their dark mood, casting shadows that danced like yesterday's flames across their faces. Rebekah sat with her hands folded in her lap, head bowed. Then, in a voice that trembled but grew stronger with each word, she began to pray. "Dear Lord," she started haltingly. "I know I'm not good at speaking fancy, but," she swallowed hard, "please give us strength to bear this trial. Help us find our way through this valley of shadows." Tears fell onto her clasped hands. "And if it be your will, show us how to stand against those who would crush us with their greed and pride." Boaz pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the wooden floor. Without a word, He moved to kneel beside Rebecca's chair, his large hands coming to rest near hers on the table. "Great Spirit," he added, his deep voice gentle, "Creator of all things, hear this child's honest prayer." His eyes closed in reverence. "Grant us the courage of our ancestors who faced trials beyond measure. Let your justice flow like waters and your righteousness like a mighty stream." Esther watched them, this unlikely pair joined in prayer. Her daughter, who had always hidden from the world, now leading them in faithful supplication. And this powerful man, part Cherokee warrior and part Christian rancher, humbling himself before the Lord at a young girl's table. Something stirred in her heart, like a tiny flame catching in dry kindling. Not hope, not yet. The pain was too fresh for that. But perhaps it was faith, small as a mustard seed. Beginning to take root in the ashes of their despair, she bowed her head and added her own silent prayer to theirs, feeling the first fragile threads of strength beginning to weave between them. They might have lost their proof, their property, and their standing in town, but here at this table, united in prayer, they had found something that fire could not destroy. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as a gentle knock echoed through Boaz's ranch house. Pastor Jonas Pell stood on the porch, his weathered Bible tucked under one arm and a cloth-wrapped loaf of fresh bread in his other hand. The aroma of warm yeast drifted through the doorway as Esther opened it. "Sister Esther," he greeted her softly, his kind eyes taking in her drawn face. "May I come in?" She stepped back, gesturing toward the kitchen table where Rebecca sat picking listlessly at a breakfast biscuit. Boaz rose from his chair, offering the pastor his seat with a respectful nod. Pastor Pell set the bread on the table, his movements deliberate as he settled into the offered chair. "I heard about the fire," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "Sister Martha baked this bread for you. The whole congregation is praying." "Much obliged," Boaz murmured, but Esther's laugh was bitter. "Prayers won't restore our proof against Crandall," she said, slumping into a chair. "Everything burned. Every letter, every deed gone." The pastor opened his Bible, pages rustling like autumn leaves. "Truth isn't just ink on paper, Sister Esther. It lives in memory and witness." His finger traced along a verse. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." Rebecca lifted her head, interest flickering in her eyes for the first time since the fire. "What do you mean?" "Pastor, your father's letters spoke of Crandall's dealings with the native families," he replied. "Those people, they're still here. Their stories didn't burn." Boaz straightened, his expression intent. "Niall Redbird," he said. "He lost grazing. Rights to Crandall's schemes. He would remember." "The Navajo elder?" Esther asked, a spark of hope lighting her face. "Yes." Boaz's deep voice held certainty. "He lives at the reservation agency. 3 days' ride from here." "Then we should go," Esther said, rising with sudden energy. "If he'll testify, I want to come too." Rebecca burst out, then shrank back, as if surprised by her own boldness. Esther hesitated, studying her daughter's face. The girl who had once hidden from every challenge now leaned forward eagerly, her eyes bright with purpose. "It could be dangerous," Esther said slowly. "The trail isn't easy. Please, Mama." Rebecca's voice was soft but steady. "I need to do this for Papa." Pastor Pell smiled gently. "Sometimes the Lord gives us strength we never knew we had," he said. "When we need it most." Esther looked at her daughter for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, we'll all go." They spent the morning preparing. Boaz checked the wagon while Esther and Rebecca packed provisions, cornmeal, coffee, dried beef, and blankets. By noon, they were ready to set out. Pastor Pell stood in the yard as they loaded the last supplies. "I'll be praying for your safe return," he said, gripping Boaz's hand. and for justice to prevail. The wagon creaked as they set out, wheels cutting fresh tracks in the dusty road. Rebecca sat between her mother and Boaz on the wooden seat, her back straighter than usual. The morning sun cast their shadow ahead of them like an arrow pointing. The way they traveled through the heat of the day, stopping only to water the horses and eat a simple lunch of bread and dried meat. The landscape changed gradually, sagebrush giving way to scattered pinyon pines, red rocks rising like sentinels against the blue sky. As evening approached, they made camp near a small creek. While Boaz tended the horses, Esther and Rebecca gathered wood for a fire. The flames cast dancing shadows as they ate a simple supper, the night air growing cool around them. "Tell me about Noel Redbird," Rebecca asked as they sat around the fire. "What kind of man is he?" "Tay," added another. "Stick to the flames before answering. A man of wisdom and honor. He remembers the old ways, but understands the new. His word carries weight with both his people and the Indian agent." The next 2 days passed in similar fashion, long hours of travel punctuated by brief rests and quiet camps. Rebecca grew more confident with each mile, helping with the horses and learning to build fires under Boaz's patient instruction. On the third day, they arrived at the agency as the sun began its descent. The building stood stark against the landscape, surrounded by smaller dwellings and corrals. Several native men looked up as the wagon approached, their expressions guarded. Noel Redbird emerged from one of the buildings, his silver hair catching the evening light. He was tall and straight-backed, despite his years, dignity wrapped around him like a blanket. His dark eyes assessed the visitors carefully. "Brother Redbird," Boaz called out in greeting, climbing down from the wagon. He helped Esther and Rebecca down, then approached the elder with respect in his stance. "Boaz McCord," Noel replied, his voice deep and measured. "You bring visitors." "This is Esther Alden and her daughter Rebecca," Boaz said. "We've come seeking your help and your testimony." Nahal's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Against Silas Crandall." "Silas Crandall." "Yes," Esther stepped forward. "He's trying to take our land, just as he took your grazing rights." The elder was silent for a long moment, studying them. Finally, he nodded. "Come, we will talk over food." They followed him to his dwelling, where his wife had already started preparing an evening meal. The aroma of cooking beans and fry bread filled the small space. They sat cross-legged around a low table as darkness gathered outside. After they had eaten, Noel spoke. His voice was like worn leather as he recounted his dealings with Crandall false promises, missing papers, threats against his family. Rebecca listened intently, her eyes never leaving the elder's face as he described how Crandall had manipulated the agency's records. "He came with papers," Nahal said, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. "Said they were standard forms. But they were tricks, taking our best grazing land. When we protested, the papers had vanished. The agent believed him, not us." Rebecca leaned forward. "Just like Papa's letters said," she breathed. "The same trick." Noel turned his penetrating gaze on her. "You have proof of this." "We did." Esther said bitterly, "But Crandall's men burned it all." The elder nodded slowly. "But I remember. I remember every word he spoke, every paper he showed, every lie he told." His eyes held a fierce light. "I will speak these memories to any judge who will hear." "You would do this?" Esther asked, hope trembling in her voice. "Truth must be spoken." Noel said simply, "Or injustice grows like poison weeds." He looked at Rebecca. "Your young one understands." "I see it in her eyes. She carries memory, too." Rebecca straightened under his approval, her usual shyness falling away. "I remember. Everything in Papa's letters," she said. "Every detail. Then together, we will speak truth," Noel said. "Let Crandall try to burn memory from our minds." The wagon wheels creaked across the dusty reservation paths as morning light spilled over the adobe buildings. Women in bright skirts and shawls moved between the dwellings, some carrying water jugs, others heading to the communal grinding stones. Rebecca watched them from her perch on the wagon seat, nervously twisting her apron in her hands. "Go on," Esther encouraged. "Softly, they won't bite." Rebecca slid down from the wagon, her feet raising small puffs of dust. An elderly woman looked up from the grinding stone and beckoned with a worn hand. Her face was etched with lines of wisdom, her dark eyes kind. "Come, young one," she said in careful English. "You help grind corn." Rebecca approached hesitantly. The woman patted the ground beside her, demonstrating the rolling motion with the heavy stone. Like this, back and forth, steady. Taking the smooth stone in her hands, Rebecca began to work. The rhythmic grinding soothed her nerves. Other women gathered, speaking softly in their native tongue. One offered her a drink of cool water from a clay jar. Meanwhile, Esther sat with a group of widows in the shade of a cottonwood tree. She pulled out her small notebook and pencil, listening intently as the women shared their stories through an interpreter. Crandall came with papers. One woman recalled, her voice thick with memory, said we must sign or lose everything. Could not read English words. He promised fair payment, another added, but money never came. Next spring, his cattle were on our grazing land. Esther's pencil scratched across the page, capturing every detail. Her heart ached at the familiar pattern of deceit. Across the settlement, Boaz sat in council with Nael, Redbird, and other tribal elders. They passed a pipe in the traditional way before speaking of serious matters. "Your people have suffered much injustice," Boaz said quietly. "I give you my word, if you testify, I will stand between you and any who would cause harm." Nael studied him with keen eyes. "You are Cherokee, yet you live among the whites." "My mother taught me to walk in both worlds," Boaz replied. "To use what I know for good." The elder nodded slowly. "We have seen your heart these 2 days. You speak truth." As dusk approached, the entire community gathered for prayer. Pastor Pell's Christian words mingled with traditional blessings. Rebecca sat between 2 young native women who had shown her kindness at the grinding stone. They smiled at her, and she felt a warmth of acceptance she'd rarely known in town. Nael rose to address the gathering. "We will speak," he announced. "When the court summons, we will come. Truth must be told." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several other elders stood, indicating their willingness to testify. Esther clutched her notebook of testimonies, tears of gratitude in her eyes. That evening, as they prepared to depart, women pressed packages of cornmeal and dried berries into Rebecca's hands. She had earned their respect through her quiet willingness to work and learn. "You remember our stories?" one elder woman asked, gripping Rebecca's arm. "Yes," Rebecca promised. "Every word." The wagon rolled away as sunset painted the desert in gold and purple. They made camp beside a shallow creek where cottonwoods whispered in the evening breeze. After a simple supper of cornbread and beans, they sat around the small fire, listening to coyotes call in the distance. "Do you reckon God sees all this?" Rebecca asked softly, gazing at the stars. "He sees," Boaz answered. "And he works through willing hearts to bring justice." Esther added another stick to the fire. "Those women trusted us with their pain," she said. "We can't let them down." "Their faith humbles me," Boaz admitted. "After all they've suffered, they still believe in justice." The flames crackled, sending sparks upward like prayers. Rebecca hugged her knees, remembering the stories she'd heard. "They're so strong," she whispered. "I want to be strong like that." "You are, daughter," Esther said, touching her hair. "You showed it these past days." They sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought as the fire burned low. The coyote's song echoed across the desert, a wild and lonely sound that seemed to carry their hopes into the vast night sky. Morning found them back on the trail toward home, their wagon lighter in provisions but heavy with precious cargo. The trust of a people, their stories preserved in Esther's notebook and Rebecca's careful memory. They had forged bonds stronger than paper. Built on shared faith and hunger for justice, Nail's final words rang in their hearts: "We will come. When you call, truth cannot burn." The courthouse in Cobra Junction buzzed with tension as townspeople filed into the cramped wooden benches. Summer heat pressed through the high windows, making papers flutter and handkerchiefs work overtime against sweaty brows. Sheriff Kell stood at rigid attention near Judge Whitfield's bench, while Pastor Pell sat in the front row, Bible open on his lap. Esther Alden's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her best dress, the fabric worn but clean. Beside her, Rebecca sat with uncharacteristic stillness, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Boaz McCord's tall frame filled the chair on Esther's other side, his presence steady as a mountain. Silas Crandall swept in through the double doors, his suit immaculate despite the dust outside. A couple of his ranch hands followed, their boots leaving dirty marks on the polished floor. Crandall's lip curled as he passed the Aldens. Order in the court. Judge Horace Whitfield's gavel cracked against wood. He was a lean man with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. This territorial hearing will now commence regarding the disputed Alden ranch deed and associated claims of fraud. Crandall rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time. These people have no proof. You'll speak when called upon. Mr. Crandall, Judge Whitfield cut in sharply. Mrs. Alden, call your first witness. Esther stood, her voice clear despite her pallor. I call Nalel Redbird. The Navajo elder walked down the center aisle, his dignity untouched by the whispers that followed him. He took the oath with grave courtesy, then turned to face the packed courthouse. Tell us about your dealings with Mr. Crandall, Esther prompted softly. Niall's deep voice carried to every corner. 3 springs ago, he came to our grazing lands, showed papers, said we must sign or lose all. Many could not read English words. He promised fair payment for each acre. And did you receive this payment? No. Nail's weathered face remained composed. Next season, his cattle were there. Our herds had no grass. When we protested, he showed different papers. Said we had. Sold all rights, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Whitfield's eyes narrowed. More witnesses followed. 3 native widows spoke through an interpreter, their stories echoing Niall's. A former bank clerk testified about missing documents. With each account, the whispers grew louder and Crandall's face darkened. Finally, he burst to his feet. This is absurd. Where is their proof? Where are these supposed papers? Everything burned in that convenient fire. His smirk held cruel triumph. Without written evidence, this is merely slander. The courthouse fell silent. Esther's shoulders slumped slightly. Then Rebecca stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor, drawing every eye. She was shaking visibly, but her chin was raised. Even Crandall paused, thrown off by this unexpected development. I memorized them, she said, her voice starting soft but growing stronger. Every letter my father wrote about Mr. Crandall's dealings. Every word. Preposterous. Crandall scoffed. The girls making it up. Judge Whitfield leaned forward. Young lady, are you prepared to testify under oath? Yes, sir. Rebecca's hands were clasped tightly together, but her gaze was steady. I read those letters every night after we found them. I know them by heart. The judge studied her thoughtfully, then nodded. Very well. Approach the bench, Miss Alden. Rebecca walked forward on trembling legs. Boaz watched her with quiet pride, while Esther pressed her hands together in silent prayer. The crowd held its breath as the young girl raised her right hand to take the oath. "I swear to tell the truth," she said clearly, "so help me God." The wooden floorboards creaked as Rebecca shifted in the witness box. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, catching dust motes that danced in the still air. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath. "The first letter was dated April 15, 1885, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Whitfield leaned forward, straining to hear. "Speak up, child," he encouraged gently. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, finding strength in her. Father's remembered words. "My dearest friend Thomas," she continued, louder now. "I write with grave concern regarding certain practices I've witnessed at the bank. Mr. Crandall has been presenting altered documents to our native neighbors, particularly in the matter of grazing rights along Eagle Creek." In the gallery, Nahul Redbird nodded slowly, his weathered face solemn. Esther pressed her handkerchief to her lips, recognizing her husband's particular way of phrasing things. "The figures don't align with our official ledgers," Rebecca continued, her voice growing steadier, "where we show payments of $2 per acre to Walking Bear's family. Crandall's private books list only 50 cents. The difference, $1.50 per acre, appears in a separate account under his personal control." Crandall's face reddened. "This is outrageous. She's inventing silence." Judge Whitfield's gavel cracked sharply. "Continue, Miss Alden." Rebecca's words flowed more confidently now. She recited dates, amounts, and names with perfect clarity. June 3, 1885, Swift Deer's mark on the bottom of page 3 has been altered. July 12, missing deed pages from Thunder Voice's file, replaced with new versions. Her father's precise observations painted a devastating picture of systematic fraud in her seat. Esther wiped away tears as she heard her husband's voice, in their daughter's careful recitation, his sense of justice, his attention to detail. It all lived on in Rebecca's perfect memory. Boaz McCord twisted his hat in his big hands, eyes glistening as he watched the young girl. He'd sworn to protect, find her own kind of strength. The native families who had made the long journey to testify exchanged knowing looks. Their heads bobbed in recognition as Rebecca named familiar places and people, confirming the truth of her words. September 1, 1885, Rebecca continued. "I can no longer remain silent about these injustices. Tomorrow I shall confront Mr. Crandall directly." Her voice caught slightly, knowing what had followed that decision, but she pressed on. Determined to honor her father's courage, the townsfolk who had once mocked her size and shyness now leaned forward, captivated. Several women dabbed at their eyes. Even Sheriff Kell looked uncomfortable, his gaze sliding away from Crandall's increasingly agitated face. Lies and slander. Crandall burst out again, half rising from his chair. "This girl is reciting a fantasy." "Mr. Crandall," Judge Whitfield's voice cracked like winter ice. "Interrupt once more, and I'll have you removed from this courtroom. The witness will continue." Rebecca spoke for nearly an hour, her memory unfailing, when she finally fell silent. The courthouse remained still, held in the grip of her father's damning words. She sat down carefully, trembling with exhaustion but glowing with quiet triumph. Esther wrapped her arms around her daughter, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered fiercely. Judge Whitfield surveyed the silent courtroom. "I will retire to consider this testimony and render my decision." He rose, gathering his papers. "This court is in recess." The gathered crowd buzzed with whispered conversation as the judge disappeared into his chambers. The wait began, heavy with hope and fear. Judge Whitfield returned to his bench, his boots echoing on worn floorboards. The courthouse fell silent, save for the creak of wooden chairs and the distant whistle of a train. Afternoon sunlight slanted through dusty windows, casting long shadows across anxious faces. Having heard the testimony, the judge began, his voice firm and measured. Particularly the extraordinary recall of Miss Rebecca Alden and the corroborating witnesses from the reservation. This court finds Silas Crandall guilty of fraud and willful deception. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Crandall's face turned purple with rage. Furthermore, Judge Whitfield continued, tapping his gavel for silence. All claims and liens held by Mr. Crandall against the Alden Ranch and McCord property are hereby voided. He turned his stern gaze to Sheriff Kell. And as for you, Sheriff, your badge is forfeit. No man who aids in such deception deserves to wear the star. The courthouse erupted. Some folks leaped to their feet, cheering and clapping. Others, Crandall's cronies, muttered darkly and skulked toward the doors. Kell yanked off his badge and flung it across the room. Storming out with a string of curses, Esther sat stunned, tears streaming down her face. Rebecca threw her arms around her mother's neck, laughing and crying all at once. Boaz stood quietly. Beside them, his broad shoulders finally relaxing after weeks of tension. Now Redbird approached them, touching his heart in greeting. The Creator sees truth, he said simply, nodding to Rebecca. You spoke with courage, little sister. Over the next few days, word spread through Copper Junction like wildfire. The truth about Crandall's schemes shocked even his supporters. By week's end, he'd fled town, leaving behind a tangle of fraudulent papers that would take months to sort through. The transformation of the town's attitude was remarkable. Where once there had been sneers and whispers, now there were waves and friendly greetings. Rebecca walked down Main Street with her head high, no longer trying to hide in shadows. Mrs. Peterson from the Mercantile called her over to help with inventory, praising her memory. Even the girls who had mocked her size now smiled sheepishly and asked to sit together at church, but the most touching change came in the form of helping hands. Early one morning, wagons began arriving at the burned-out Alden homestead. Men with tools, women with baskets of food, children carrying bundles of blankets, all came to help rebuild. "Ain't right what happened to you folks," old Tom Wheeler said, already marking lumber for new wall beams. Time we made it right. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air. Women set up a cooking station, feeding the workers throughout the day. Rebecca helped wherever she could, passing nails, holding boards steady, running errands. Her quiet competence earned genuine smiles of approval. By sunset, the basic frame of the cabin stood strong against the purple sky. Lanterns were lit, and tables set up in the yard. The whole community gathered for an impromptu supper, sharing dishes and stories late into the evening. Inside the partially finished cabin, Esther moved through the new rooms, touching fresh-cut lumber with wondering fingers. The space smelled of pine and promise. Rebecca had already claimed her new bedroom. Smaller than before, but somehow more precious. Later, when most folks had headed home and the stars were bright overhead, Esther found Boaz on the new porch. He stood looking out over the merged ranches. His property and hers now forming one unbroken stretch of good grazing land. "I prayed so many nights," Esther said softly, joining him at the railing. "Prayed for protection, for someone to help us stand against Crandall." She turned to face him, her eyes bright in the starlight. "But God sent me more than a protector. He sent me a partner." Boaz's large hand covered hers on the railing. "Then maybe it's time we made it official," he said. "Let's raise this family together, Esther, you, me, and Rebecca, the way it should be." A peaceful warmth spread through Esther's chest like sunshine after rain. Behind them, through the cabin's open door, they could hear Rebecca humming as she arranged her few belongings in her new room. The sound of coyotes floated across the range. Familiar now, rather than frightening. The moon rose over their joined ranches, silvering the grass and casting long shadows from the new cabin walls. For the first time in years, Esther felt the weight of fear and uncertainty lift from her shoulders. Here, with Boaz's strength beside her and Rebekah's courage proven, they had found more than justice. They had found home. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.